Thank you, Tamina. Thank you, everyone. This is a great event. This is the first time I've been asked to give closing remarks. It's a kind of special art because you're supposed to integrate what's just happened. Therefore, you can't quite prepare in advance. Unless you're willing to take a bet, that is, or just not match anything that's been said. So low expectations, first of all. I direct BCEP, the Berkeley CEnter for Political Economy. I also act as field advisor in the PhD program where Tarek makes us proud every day. Let me tell you a little bit about the focus that we have. And then I'll try to sort of integrate some of the things you've heard. So you've been thrown a lot of information, so maybe the one service I can provide is try to integrate some of that content. The focus that we have as political economists is really trying to take theory seriously and embed it into experimental design that we can take to the field or to the lab. And the idea of being serious about the theory is that it really allows the data to acquire an external validity that it would not have outside the particular instance that we happen to be studying. Mostly, our focus is on the typical things that political economists care about, like institutions and power and politics and the ways in which these factors interact with the economy. But recently, there are new areas that I believe have opened up, and some of the things we've heard about today are examples of these. I'll also mention some of the other work that is being done in the Berkeley campus that I think represents promising avenues going forward. So I think it's not difficult to agree that the final goal that we all have is we want to have a peaceful, happy, prosperous world, and I think by now it's not controversial the idea that we need a dual development of capabilities both in the private sector and in the public sector so that market activities can be supported. Now this ties to roughly three broad areas that are interesting to study. One is the area of technology adoption and general development of human capital. So Tarek's project is one example that you've heard about today where technology adoption is part of the solution perhaps to some of the biggest problems that we have supporting economic activity in areas that are complicated, for instance, due to conflict or corruption. Human capital development is in general a big deal, so every project that you might have heard about today, earlier or in the future concerning education is therefore important in that big picture. Even I would say some of the findings you may have heard about, not to focus on the market for sex, but the very possibility that people in complicated circumstances might engage in riskier behavior implies that we have some of the ingredients for possibly negative spirals where worse conditions lead to worse behavior that in turn leads to worse conditions. So there's something profound about this type of findings. Beyond that, there are two other aspects that I believe are important. So institutions and empowerment is one of them, and the other one is the development of state capabilities. With respect to institutions, I think the work we've seen by Ted and Catherine on Sierra Leone is a wonderful example of work that is trying to get at in which ways, very detailed and concrete ways, institutions might be driving outcomes. With respect to the development of state capabilities, I'd like to tell you briefly about work that we've been doing with Fred Finan, who's here, he's in the Econ department, advising the Mexican government on a program that's seeking to expand state presence in areas of the country that have complications and where the state is effectively quite absent. So I think we can agree on the fact that any attempt at building capacity, this might be in the state or in NGOs or even in the private sector, requires ultimately getting good people. And the question arises, how do you do that? The first answer of an economist would be, pay more. This might seem Econ 101. Well, it turns out that we had never really run an experiment where we could really see whether paying more helps at attracting more and better people. Now, thinking about better people also poses the question of how do you tell who's a good person, what's a good worker? So Someone mentioned earlier, aspects of social psychology. Well, this is a project where aspects of personnel psychology were integral. So we brought in the sort of things that firms do, human resource departments do, and brought that type of expertise into a project that's about the development of state capacities by measuring personal qualities quite in detail. So the results of this is that it is possible to measure human quality in terms of adequacy to fulfilling the function of something like a community development agent. But then there are further steps ahead in terms of looking at whether, how far can money help in terms of attracting better people, and how does this interact with the terrain? So this is not about hiring someone to come and work in Berkeley, which is a pleasant location. It's about trying to get people to work in areas that are remote and very difficult, potentially unsafe, not developed, and with lots of challenges. So it turns out that money does help at attracting better people, and it differentially helps at filling positions in less advantageous locations. Now, there are challenges going forward. One thing that is important is once you're running an operation of any kind, again, be it in the public sector, in an NGO, or in a firm, you need to develop a bureaucracy. And the question is, how do you do that? And this is one of the challenging areas that we have ahead. Part of the problem of developing a bureaucracy is you're not going to be there every day. You're not going to be there in 2 years. So really what this is about is developing leadership. It's developing people that can come to own the problem. And this is something that came up, I think, in the Radelet's exposition. I think this is one of the most interesting areas that we have going forward. And we have PhD students in our program beginning to do work in terms of tying personal characteristics to leadership activities, at least in the lab for now. Finally, there is one other important challenge, I think, which is what develops citizenship. One thing that we intend to do in Mexico is go back to the field and see how the state presence may or may not affect positively popular perceptions about the role of the government. The project by Ted and Catherine is, again, a wonderful example about being able to measure levels of engagement. Why is this important? I'll give you perhaps a kind of extreme example. So we just did a course with our PhD students on states, elites, and bureaucracies. We began with the Sumerian city-state, and we ended with Louis XIV. So you look at the different examples of state formation, and what you realize is the most authoritarian states are the ones that develop state capacities, and they do it by developing a big bureaucracy. There's two exceptions, Greece and Rome, which are the two examples where citizenship plays a huge role. The way in which they provide public goods is by resorting to individuals and groups at participating actively in generating the provision of public goods. So this can be an alternative to the sheer provision through bureaucracies, but we need to come to understand what generates citizenship, what is the way to get people engaged. And so we have areas of work going forward. Ted is heavily involved in that, and that's one of the ways in which we're intending to go with Fred. So this is one way, I think, in which some of these issues tie together, and I hope you've had fun so far, and I'm looking forward to continuing the conversation during cocktails and dinner. Thank you.